Hi, I'm Connor Schrank. I'm joined here today with Frida Pettijohn. How are you doing today, ma'am?
Fine, thank you.
Good, good. All right, so tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do at the James Wickham Riley House and the touring.
Well, I'm a retired secretary, and I wanted a part-time job, so I came over here and worked giving tours, mainly to the large tours are for the school groups, but it is open to anyone that wants to go through, and we tell the story and about the artifacts that are in the building.
That's cool. So how often do you get school groups to come tour the house?
Well, of course, in the late spring and early fall, they have their tours more, and we're closed from November till April.
Okay.
Yes, so it's in that period, and they have different times, but I'd say maybe May and October's a good year.
That's good. So transitioning on from the tours to James Wickham Riley's life, what persuaded him to go onto the road and leave Greenfield?
Well, his father had him working in the garden. He didn't like that. He wanted something more creative, so he met a medicine man here in town that had come to town to put on a show to sell the medicine like they did back in the 1800s. So he went off with this guy, and he started writing and drawing pictures and writing little poems, and they saw it was really interesting. And he was developing his talents right there, and so that got him away from Greenfield. But he later came back, of course, to stay and really love it.
Oh, that's good. So what did James Wickham Riley do when he was on the road?
Well, he would paint barns too. He also painted advertising on barns through the county around here. Yes, and he made up those rhymes, of course, for the men to give at the medicine shows. I'd say this is what they were called. And then I'd say he would work at anything he could get, not very steady. Sometimes he was even selling Bibles, and sometimes he was doing selling books or something to make ends meet, but he wasn't really working at a job continually.
Okay, all right. So in the origins of, since he's very famous for his poems, where did he get his inspiration to write his poems? Well,
mostly from right here in this Greenfield, around the people that he lived and lived with here. Like Little Orphan Annie was a girl that came to their home to work, and Frost on the Pumpkin, he loved the weather here and noticed all the different colors when he wrote that piece, and about the Brandywine and the swimming hole, the things he did in his life. And if you want really a picture of the 1800, read Riley. He tells you, and he speaks in the dialect of the people that talked back then. Now remember, education was not as large or not as much education as we had today. But that's where he got it from, where he lived, right here in town.
So before he did poems, he did some paintings, right? Or some artistry. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, he just did that, like I said, he painted the barns and he drew some pictures, and he was acquainted with people that did a lot of painting, and it encouraged him to do that. So he was a fairly good painter, really.
I didn't even know about that. So what poems got him to his fame? Like what poems really just stood out to everybody around the world?
Well, of course, I mentioned Little Orphan Annie, and also Frost on the Pumpkin, and A Backward Look, I think, was about one of the first poems he ever wrote, and it starts about his life and mentions a couple of articles we have over in the Riley home. And as I said, most all of it was just his way he lived and the articles he had and his life that he was involved in at that time. And he wasn't real well as a child, but that didn't stop him. He still wasn't one that liked to do a lot of manual labor.
I can relate to that.
Yes.
So as beautiful as this house is this where James Wickham Riley grew up?
Not in this house. Okay. It's in the house next door. Right. But he was born in a log cabin on the land right behind the house. And then his father built that house next door. 1850 to 1853 they moved in. And after the Civil War came along, his father went to the war. He came back injured and wasn't able to make a living as a lawyer. So he had to sell the house because he wasn't making enough.
Okay. So when James Wickham Riley was growing up, I know that he was actually interested in playing a lot of instruments.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the instruments that he played and what some of his favorites were.
Well, his very favorite was a violin, and he tried to play it, and he did play it, but he injured his hand, and he couldn't manipulate the strings on a violin, and that was a disappointment. So he started in on other things. He played the drums, he played the organ, and he also played the guitar and a banjo and a flute. But they were just himself. He made them up. It wasn't that they took lessons on him or anything like that.
Okay.
A natural talent that he could use.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit more about the house that he lived to next door. Tell me a little bit more about that, the origins with that.
Well, after they had lived in the cabin, his father had started his law practice, and the mother had the 3 children there, the first 3. Then they moved in the house. They had 3 more children. And his father built that. It took him about 3 years. And you have to realize what primitive tools they had back then and realize how wonderful it was. They could build something last that long and look that good.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's a pretty good looking house.
Yes. And so James was raised there. He was about 12 or a little older teenage. He was in his teens when the folks moved out. And then after that, he went on his own. He was through with family. You know, he's about 16, he was gone.
A rebel. All right, so to end this, what is James Wickham Riley's legacy? So where did all this end up, and how is he known?
Well, I feel he's known for his poetry and rhyming poetry mainly. And also he was not only a poet, but he was an entertainer. What he wrote, he could entertain, and he was known throughout the United States. One time they even closed all the schools to celebrate his birthday.
Wow.
In October before he died.
Wow, I did not even know that.
And across the United States only. But I say his legacy was his rhyming poets from the 1800s. And he'll give you a good picture of what life was like then, how the people lived, talked, and dressed. And you'll enjoy knowing how people were in that time, and they're all our past relatives.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Frida. I really appreciate this opportunity to come
Well,
in.
thank you for coming. We're glad you came to see us.
Show me around.
The floors are the original floors.
Beautiful, beautiful floors.
His father started his law practice in the log cabin. When they moved in this house, his father took this room for his office. He later had an office downtown, but that building's since burned. I called attention to this desk because his father made it.
Wow.
And it's made out of black walnut, and it's a partner's desk.
Wow. Interesting.
There's a
Look at all this
bookcase
gold.
here, and then over here, it is the same on both sides. See, and the floors here in this room are the same too. And I'm sure they had a fireplace, but that has been replaced with a parlor stove from the 1800s. All right. His father made these steps, and you have to realize what little tools he had to work with, but to make a step like this in the 1850s.
I wouldn't be able to do this even in 2017.
With all the materials you have. It's to that door. Little Orphan Annie was brought during the Civil War. She was a little girl that her mother and father had separation or something. The uncle was caring for her, had her in his care. And she came here to work. She was 12. That was not unusual. Girls 12 often got a job, and they wanted to get her a job. So she came here to work. Miss Riley taught her to clean these very floors and clean these steps, and she named all of them, made up stories about them, and had a wonderful time working here for an orphan girl.
So little Orphan Annie, she was
Yes.
just, that's one of his most popular poems,
Yes,
right? And so that's a lot of based on this.
Her name was Mary Alice Smith, and they called her Allie. And after she left and James grew up to be a man, he wrote that poem, Little Orphan Allie Came to Our House, sent it to the printer, and it was changed accidentally.
Oh, from Allie to Annie?
Well, they were going to change it, but it was doing well, so I didn't do
You'll have to, that's
that. Okay.
interesting, right?
Now she came back later, they found her, and she came back in the way they identified her, she named the steps. This is the father and mother's room. The father made that cradle for the children. And the pictures in the picture frame, that's some jewelry that belonged to Mrs. Riley.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Now the bed was donated by the Mitchell family, which were neighbors of. When they died, their children wanted that bed, which it weighs a ton. Brought in, yes, I'm not kidding. This is a sewing box the father made. Look, it has her initials, Elizabeth Marine Riley.
Wow.
Now, the mother made all the clothes for the family back then. And this is made out of black walnut. You put needles and pins and scissors and trimmings, and you've made your own patterns. This is from a wallpaper or a calendar.
It's just the, I just appreciate it so much, the amount of work that just goes into just the handmade.
Father made the chair. After Father came home from the Civil War, he was injured. They had to sell this house, and they moved in with Reuben's mother. House down here has since been destroyed. Miss Riley became ill. The father had made that chair. They had it with him. Miss Riley was put in the chair, and she died of congestive heart failure. She's 48 years old. This sewing machine belonged to Riley's. That's made by Mr. Howe. Mr. Howe was the man that invented the machine.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of the first ones out here. See, it makes them two bottles and covers, but we can't do it too much. It's too old.
So were they, I mean, this house is, it's pretty nice. So were they a well-off family at his childhood?
Well, pretty well off, yes. Now, they didn't have a ballroom in the house like they had in some of the bigger houses, but for that period in life here in Greenfield, it was very nice.
Yeah.
And the girls slept here. We didn't have mattresses in the dormers.
Wow.
And there's your bathroom. Cold water.
Oh, porcelain, that's interesting.
All those had to be emptied every morning. The father made this chest of drawers, and he made this box here for his wife to mother of pearl, seeing this wallpaper.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So that's important things, I think. But he made furniture after he couldn't do his law practice, so and I'm sure there's a lot of bartering involved. Well, James, there was a trundle bed in there, and he slept there. Then he moved in here, and his brother there. And here's these instruments they played. Little Orphan Annie brought him up here and told him once there was a little boy who wouldn't say his prayers. And when he went to bed at night, away upstairs, his mammy heard him holler, his daddy heard him bawl. When they turned the covers back, he wasn't there at all. They seeked him in the rafter room, the cubby hole of the press. They seeked him up the chimney flue and everywhere, I guess. All they ever found was just his pants and roundabout. Goblins will get you if you don't watch out. These are pants from the 1800s, not Riley's. That's a roundabout. A shirt with buttons around the bottom. They button the pants on. That little dress was Riley's. She wore it the first grade. Mother could make them. Here's a pair of Riley's shoes. Little, see how?
So cute.
He would have worn them, passed them on to his sister, or she would have passed them on down.
That is just for you.
And the goblin's eyes. Have you got time to see?
Oh.
Now here. You look in there and look to the right as far as you can, and you'll see. And be careful, you get whacked in the head. Get your head in. Don't go in. Just now look to your right and see the eyes.
Oh yeah, if you can get in there. Oh, light showing through. Yeah, he's pretty imaginative with his writing.
Yes, but she made up the stories, and he put them to poems. And the toys, that dress James brought from Europe for his little sister. If this in your way, move it, you can.
Oh, no, that's fine.
His father made the washstand for the boys' bathroom.
Okay.
Okay, I'm giving you the rush job, you know.
Oh, you're fine, you're fine.
Okay. Now, watch this step there. Little Orphan Annie came here, they cleaned out this first storeroom, and she slept in that spot on a bed similar to that. Miss Riley sewed up some material and had them put straw in it, and she could use that to go downstairs and sleep at night to keep the fires going in the fireplace.
So how old was Little Orphan Annie?
She was about 12.
12? Wow.
And, well, that was not unusual.
Oh,
Girls
yeah.
had to help with housework and so forth. Out back, you would have seen a barn for the horses, cows, pig pen, chicken house, woodshed, outhouse, smokers. I can tell you all that stuff. Let's go down the stairs. Little Orphan Annie went down every morning. Now, she slept in that spot. As I say, Miss Riley had a bed made like that for her. Not like that. That's not it, but one like it. The stairs are uneven. The first step's like this. The others are all different sizes. The father made it that way intentionally. That's a burglar alarm. Anyone come in, they would, door went straight out, see? And they would stumble and fall.
That's actually pretty genius, actually.
Yes, not like what we have in our home where we set buttons.
The security systems.
Right. So you hang on to these when we go down, please. And
Will do.
Little Orphan Annie came to our house today to wash the cups and saucers up and brush the crumbs away. and shoo the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth and sweep and make the fires and bake the bread and earn her board and keep. Now all us other children, when the supper things are done, we'd sit around the kitchen fire and have the mostest fun, listening to the witch tales that Annie told about. Goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Now these things are not Riley's. I'll point out a few things to you, but they're things they used during the 1800s. They made their own butter. You can barely pick up that tea kettle. It's
heavy.
And the waffle iron.
Oh, wow.
Now these were not Riley's, but they're articles from the 1800s that would have fallen in. This is just, I can just barely lift it.
Yeah, that's pretty hefty.
And here's they sharpen knives on a homemade brick, which they made bricks for this. They sharpen pewterware. Please don't touch that. You're good in your eyes. It's bad news. This is shyness. The handle that's made from a bone of a dead animal. Please don't touch it. I'm afraid you're good in your eye. They made the lye soap, scratchers, tub of water and a board. Home water had a stream out back. And later, they get a few bugs. They went to the bottom, but nobody really bothered. And everybody drank out of the same dipper. And this is a dipper his father made out of a coconut shell.
Oh, wow. Yep, you can see
and black walnut, and this is lead. And they had no refrigeration. They had a pie safe. It's just a cabinet. They put the food in here to keep the bugs and the kids out of it. The father made this canoe bowl to make bread. You didn't buy bread. You made it. And someone made Mama potato masher out of a block of wood. All this was part of Riley's. I'm gonna have to go. I'll keep you here all day. I'll call attention to three things in here quickly. The wallpaper and the floor and the lamp are all reproductions of 18th century. Someone donated that light recently. That little pan's under there is where the oil was kept. You see it? Now the wallpaper's is actually a reproduction of the 1800s, but not Riley's. We don't know what they had.
Yeah.
And the floor was put down in strips. They had no sweeper, so they used a broom. In the spring, they would take it out and beat the strips, up and put them back down for another year. And this here, that's a soup tureen Mrs. Rye brought in the covered wagon in 1844. And this is a cubby hole. Little Orphan Annie said, one time there was a little girl who always laughed and grinned and made fun of old folks and all her blood and kin. Once when there was company and old folks was there, she mocked them and shocked them and said she didn't care. Just when she kicked her heels and turned to run and hide, there were two great big black things standing by her side. They snatched her through the ceiling, for she knew what she's about. Goblins will get you if you don't watch out. She put the kids in there and tell them jokes. We put the kids in and then let them scream and they get rid of all the goblins. So,
that's a little...
Yeah, it's kind of squeamish. Some do and some don't. You can stand up in there. Even you could stand up in there.
Oh, how far does it go up in there?
Well, pretty high.
Pretty high. Really?
I've had some biggies in there.
I don't know. I'm pretty tall.
How tall?
Let's see.
See if you can stand up.
Oh, yep. It fits perfect up. Yep.
I thought you could. Isn't that neat?
It's neat.
We're going to give cards that later. You've survived.
It's just survived the cover.
Little Orphan Annie said, when the flame is blue and the lamp wick sputters and the wind goes and you hear the crickets quit and the moon is gray and the lightning bugs and dews all melt away, better mind your parents and your teachers fond and dear, and cherish them that love you and dry the orphan's tear and help the poor needy one that's clustered all about, or the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. This is a sitting room we called a family room today. His father used that desk in the log cabin before he built the house and the new desk. The two pictures between the windows made of the hair of the Riley women. Women didn't wash their hair in the winter because they had no way to dry it.
Right.
And they were afraid they'd get pneumonia or something really serious.
Right.
So they cut their hair, but every night they brushed it to get the dirt and oil out of their hair. And then they'd save it in little containers and take the hair and put it in a pan with a flour and some water, special colored flower, and the hair would get the color from the flower.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Now there's a violin in remembrance of Riley's days, not his, but in remembrance of his love for violin. The organ, we're not sure that's Mrs. Riley's, but she would have had one in that year because she played the organ, taught James to play. This is the hammered dulcimer. That's the older kind. Now they have the newer kind that's smaller. Are you familiar with them?
I'm not familiar with it, actually.
And this globe here in the middle of the table was on the desk of one of his teachers. He went to school in a home. A lady had tables set up and she would teach them, and that was on her desk. James hated school. Math was a misery and history was mystery. He didn't like that stuff. But he received he got a tutor after he got out of school to teach him how. And he quit school at 16, which made his father very, very angry. But he received 3 honorary doctorates, one from Yale, one from Indiana University, and one from Wabash, for his contribution to literature.
Oh, okay.
That's his mother's chair. And here's a decoupage, I guess you'd call it, his sister's made about 200 years ago.
Okay.
It's they cut pictures out of a newspaper Sunday school lesson, and those flower catalog called the seed catalog had flowers and leaves and framed it. And how that has survived that long, I do not know. Well, I don't know how they put it together. So it's always been a mystery to me and one I really enjoy. But did I tell you that's his mother's chair? She uses when she's here, okay? And this is the last room. Look in there, shows you how the house was built. There's hair in the plaster, horsehair. And that trunk down there has some of his father's tools in it.
So what would the horsehairs be used for specifically?
Well, kind of like an insulation, as best I could think, or to help hold the plaster. It's different kind of materials than we use today, so it's hard to tell what's.
Right.
Here's a picture of little Orphan Annie when she was, I don't know if this before, it must have been before she came here. And she left here, she went to Philadelphia, Indiana, which is up the road here, and worked in an inn, which is like a motel today, only they fed people. This is a home she lived in with her husband. She married Mr. Gray, a Civil War veteran. And it's covered now. We have a newer picture of it, and it's still up there. Her great-great-granddaughter's still living in it.
Wow.
It's not open to the public.
Right.
Here's Mary Alice at about 40. Mary Alice Gray now. He was named for the governor of Indiana. His father was a lawyer, but he went down and worked at the State House with James Whitcomb, and he named his second son for him. This is him on his 67th birthday, and that's his cousin, a lawyer, with his family. Now they look kind of sober, but you weren't allowed to smile then. You had to sit real still. That's Julia, John, his oldest brother's wife, they lived in the house after James brought it back. And that's his sister's boy, Edmund Idle. And he came to visit her, and they tried to find little Orphan Annie. That's a Canadian poet, Bliss Carman. He came here from Canada. He was celebrating his birthday. James died the next July. This was in October of 1915. He died in, I believe, July 1916, and had a stroke, and they found him in his bed up at the Lockerbie Square. But here's the 4 children. That's John, and that's his wife. They had no children. They moved in after James bought the house back and lived in it until she became, after the brother died, and then she became elderly. The city bought the house, and it owns it's operated by the Parks and Recreation Department. That's James, he had no children. This is Alva May, and that's her son, and she married a banker. That's Edmund Idle, she also had a daughter. This is the young girl, Mary Ellis, and she had 1 child, so there weren't a lot of grandchildren. Here's the 5 right here. This is John and James. They were born in a log cabin. There was a little girl born between them, and she died of. And then here's Alexander Humboldt. He died at 21 with scarlet fever. So these are the 4 that lived. That's Alva May and Mary Elizabeth, James and John. It was right there. Here's a poet with Edmund. Edmund, that was his only nephew. He had 2 girls, so there wasn't a big family. Now I remember I said Edmund came back here after Julie was living here and tried to find little Orphan Annie as an adult. He found her. She's in her 70s. There's her grandchildren. This is Julia, John's wife, and her sister living here in the big house you're in. This is highway for they're going to make a highway out of it now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's a 1922 Rio automobile.
Wow.
James wrote over 1,000 pieces, and I'll close with this prayer. Perfect. Dear Lord, kind Lord, gracious Lord, I pray, Thou will look on all I love tenderly today. Weed their hearts of weariness, scatter every care. Down a wake of angel wings, winnowing the air. Bring unto the sorrowing all release from pain, and let the lips of laughter overflow again. And with all the needy, oh divide, I pray, this vast treasure of content that is mine today. James Riley.
Amazing.
Do you know what a treasure of content is? That's when you're satisfied with what you got. James was, he's satisfied right here. The grounds are open to the people anytime you want to come in. You can see the grounds with flowers and all. Of course, different times of years are better than others. The kitchen is, Elizabeth Ann's kitchen is, we rent that out for parties about 20, 25 for a day. There's a cold refrigerator and restroom in there. Mm-hmm. And that garden is called the Pioneer Garden. It has that prayer perfect on those gray slabs of stone out there.
It's beautiful. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yes, it is. And like this brochures for weddings and programs. This is a great hobby. They had one about here. I don't know how far back the house went at that time, but I know it went that way. There was an orchard here, and there was a garden and a barn. And which you had to have. That was not a farm.
Right.
That was just living what you had back there. And these, the different garden clubs take care of these different organizations, Herb Society, and those flowers are just beautiful. Some years things are prettier than others, you know. But come down here, come down. We'd like to have the house like this. All of them play such a big thing. And here's the home of our home now. And there's Riley's tomb in Minneapolis. And there's his mother and father out here. You go out here and look at it sometime.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Frida. I really have enjoyed the tour, and thank you for taking me around.
Well, do
really
come
appreciate it.
back.
I will. We will.
Bring your
For sure.
friends. We like to show the house off to everyone.